The dust swirled around Diana Jensen's boots as she stood at the edge of Canon City, Colorado, watching another wedding procession move down the main street, and she felt nothing but the hollow ache where hope used to live. It was July of 1878, and the summer heat pressed down on the small mining town like a heavy blanket, but the coldness inside her chest felt far more oppressive than any temperature the western sun could produce. She had arrived in Canon City 3 months ago, running from a past that had taught her the cruelest lesson of all. That love was nothing more than a pretty lie people told themselves before reality crushed them beneath its boot heel. Diana had once believed in love with the fervor of a preacher on Sunday morning. Back in St. Louis, she had given her heart completely to a man named Thomas Whitmore, a banker's son with smooth hands and smoother words. They were to be married in the spring of 1877, and Diana had spent months preparing for a life she thought would be filled with joy and partnership. Instead, she discovered 2 weeks before the wedding that Thomas had been courting another woman simultaneously, the daughter of a railroad magnate whose fortune far exceeded Diana's modest inheritance. The humiliation had been crushing, but worse was the realization that everything she had believed about their connection had been fabricated. Thomas had never loved her. He had seen her as a convenient option, nothing more. The betrayal had shattered something fundamental inside Diana. She had withdrawn from society, enduring the pitying looks and whispered gossip until she could bear it no longer. When her aunt passed away and left her a small boarding house in Canon City, Diana had seized the opportunity to disappear into the West, where nobody knew her story and nobody would ask questions she did not want to answer. She had been managing the boarding house ever since, keeping her interactions brief, and her heart locked away where it could never be broken again. Now, standing in the July heat watching strangers celebrate something she no longer believed in, Diana felt the familiar bitterness rise in her throat. She turned away from the wedding party and headed back toward her boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure on the edge of town that had seen better days but served its purpose well enough. She had 6 regular boarders, mostly minors and 1 elderly woman who kept to herself, and Diana preferred it that way. The less emotional entanglement, the better. She was halfway back to the boarding house when she heard the commotion coming from the direction of the livery stable. Shouting voices carried on the hot air, and Diana paused despite herself. Canon City was generally a peaceful town, one of the reasons she had chosen to stay, and disturbances were rare enough to warrant attention. She changed direction, drawn by curiosity more than concern, and rounded the corner to find a crowd gathering near the stable entrance. A man lay on the ground, clutching his leg while blood seeped between his fingers. Another man stood nearby, gesturing wildly and explaining something to Sheriff Paulson, who had arrived moments before Diana. The injured man was groaning in pain, and Diana felt her instincts override her desire to remain uninvolved. She had learned basic medical care from her mother, who had been a nurse before marriage, and those skills had proven useful more than once in Canon City. "Let me through," Diana said firmly, pushing past the onlookers. She knelt beside the injured man, a miner she recognized as one of the regular customers at the general store, and quickly assessed the wound. A jagged piece of wood had pierced his calf, likely from a broken fence rail based on the debris scattered nearby. "This needs proper cleaning and stitching. Help me get him to Doc Harrison." 2 men stepped forward to lift the injured miner, and Diana stood, wiping her bloodied hands on her already dusty skirt. That was when she noticed him standing slightly apart from the crowd, watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He was tall, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in autumn. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and a hat that had weathered many seasons. There was something about the way he stood, relaxed but alert, that suggested capability and confidence without arrogance. Their eyes met for just a moment before Diana looked away, irritated by the flutter of awareness that tried to spark in her chest. She crushed it immediately and focused on following the men carrying the injured miner toward the doctor's office. She did not need or want the attention of any man, especially not some drifting cowboy who would probably be gone within the week. But when she emerged from Doc Harrison's office an hour later, having assisted with cleaning and stitching the wound, the cowboy was sitting on the bench outside, hat in his hands, apparently waiting for her. "Can I help you?" Diana asked, her tone carefully neutral. He stood, and she noticed again how tall he was, though his posture remained respectful rather than imposing. "I wanted to thank you for stepping in back there. Not many people would have moved so quickly to help." "It was common decency, nothing more," Diana replied. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She started to walk past him, but his next words stopped her. "I am Dylan Armstrong. I just hired on at the Maxwell Ranch outside town. Figured I should introduce myself since I will be boarding at your place." Diana turned back slowly, processing this unwelcome information. "My boarding house?" "Yes, madam. Mr. Maxwell arranged it. Said you had a room available and that you ran a respectable establishment. I am supposed to start tomorrow, but I arrived a day early." He smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I hope that is not a problem." It was absolutely a problem, but Diana could not afford to turn away a paying customer, especially one recommended by Richard Maxwell, who owned the largest cattle operation in the area and whose word carried significant weight in Canon City. She swallowed her irritation and nodded curtly. "The room is $5 a week, including 2 meals a day. Breakfast is at 6 in the morning, supper at 7 in the evening. No drinking, no gambling, no visitors after 9 o'clock. If you can abide by those rules, you are welcome." "Sounds fair to me," Dylan said, settling his hat back on his head. "Should I come by now to settle in?" "If you must," Diana replied, already walking toward her boarding house. Dylan fell into step beside her, leading a handsome bay horse that had been tied near the doctor's office. He did not try to make conversation, which Diana appreciated, though she was acutely aware of his presence beside her. They walked the 3 blocks to her boarding house in silence, and Diana told herself that the awareness prickling along her skin was annoyance, nothing more. The boarding house looked particularly worn in the harsh afternoon light, but Dylan did not comment on its appearance. Diana led him inside, where the interior was clean if sparse, and showed him to a room on the 2nd floor. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand with basin and pitcher, a small chest of drawers, and a single chair. The window overlooked the street, and thin curtains provided minimal privacy. "This will do just fine," Dylan said, setting his saddlebags on the bed. "Thank you, Miss Jensen." Diana paused in the doorway. "How do you know my name?" Mr. Maxwell mentioned it when he arranged the boarding. "Also, I asked around town a bit. People speak well of you, say you keep to yourself but run an honest establishment and help out when there is trouble." His creek water eyes studied her with that same unsettling intensity. "Seems like an accurate assessment based on what I saw today. What people say about me is none of my concern," Diana replied coolly. "Supper is at 7. Do not be late." She left before he could respond, retreating to the kitchen where she could focus on the familiar tasks of preparing the evening meal. She had a large pot of beef stew simmering on the stove, and she threw herself into cutting bread and setting the table in the dining room, trying to ignore the strange restlessness that had settled over her since meeting Dylan Armstrong. The other boarders arrived for supper right on time. There was Frank Morrison, a grizzled miner in his 50s who had been searching for silver in the nearby mountains for 3 years with minimal success. Samuel Chen, a quiet man who worked at the Chinese laundry and kept mostly to himself, despite the prejudice he often faced in town. John Peters and his younger brother Michael, both miners who sent most of their earnings back to family in Pennsylvania. And Mrs. Abigail Cooper, the elderly widow who occupied the smallest room and rarely spoke, but always offered Deanna a gentle smile. Dylan arrived precisely at 7, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt. Deanna served the stew without ceremony, and conversation around the table remained minimal as the hungry men focused on their food. It was only when plates were nearly empty that Frank spoke up. "You the new hand at the Maxwell place?" he asked Dylan. "Yes, sir, starting tomorrow. I will be working with the cattle, doing whatever Mr. Maxwell needs." "Good man, Richard Maxwell," Frank said, nodding. "Treats his workers fair, pays on time. You picked a decent outfit to work for." "That was my impression," Dylan agreed. "I have been working ranches since I was 16. Drifted around Texas and New Mexico mostly, but decided to try my luck further north." "Where are you from originally, Mrs.?" Cooper asked, her soft voice surprising everyone since she rarely participated in table conversation. "Born in Kansas, madam, but my family moved to Texas when I was young. Lost both my parents to fever when I was 15, so I have been making my own way ever since." Dylan's expression remained neutral, but Deanna caught the flicker of old pain in his eyes. She stood abruptly, collecting plates with more noise than necessary. "There is berry cobbler if anyone wants dessert." The meal concluded without further personal revelations, and Deanna cleaned up while the boarders retreated to their rooms or headed out for the evening. She was scrubbing the last pot when she sensed someone in the kitchen doorway. She did not need to turn around to know it was Dylan. "Can I help you, Mr. Armstrong?" she asked without looking up. "I was hoping I could help you, actually. Seems like a lot of work, cooking and cleaning for all those people by yourself." "I manage perfectly well on my own, thank you." Deanna set the pot aside to dry and finally turned to face him. "Was there something else you needed?" Dylan leaned against the doorframe, studying her with an expression that made her deeply uncomfortable because it suggested he saw more than she wanted to reveal. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Put up walls the moment someone tries to be friendly." Deanna felt anger flash through her, hot and defensive. "You do not know anything about me, Mr. Armstrong. I suggest you keep your observations to yourself and remember that our relationship is strictly that of landlady and boarder." "Nothing more." "I did not suggest it should be anything more," Dylan replied calmly. "I was just offering to help with the dishes." Diana felt foolish for her overreaction but refused to show it. "I do not need help. If you will excuse me, I have other work to attend to." She pushed past him and climbed the stairs to her own small room on the second floor, closing the door firmly behind her. Her heart was beating too fast, and her hands trembled slightly as she lit the oil lamp beside her bed. She hated that Dylan Armstrong had gotten under her skin so quickly, hated the way he looked at her as if he could see past all her carefully constructed defenses. Diana sat on her bed and forced herself to breathe slowly, deliberately. This was exactly why she had sworn off any emotional connections, especially with men. They complicated things, made you vulnerable, and ultimately caused nothing but pain. She had learned that lesson thoroughly with Thomas, and she would not forget it just because some cowboy had kind eyes and an easy smile. The next morning, Diana woke before dawn as usual and dressed quickly in a simple gray cotton dress. She plaited her dark blonde hair into a practical braid and headed downstairs to start breakfast. By the time the boarders began appearing, she had prepared eggs, bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee, all of which disappeared quickly as the men fueled up for their various labors. Dylan was the last to arrive, apologizing for his slight tardiness. "Had to get my gear organized for the day. Mr. Maxwell is sending someone to collect me shortly." "There is still food left," Deanna said, gesturing to the stove. "Help yourself." She busied herself cleaning up while Dylan ate quickly, but with obvious appreciation. He thanked her sincerely before heading out, and Diana felt a confusing mixture of relief and disappointment at his departure. She told herself firmly that relief was the only appropriate emotion, and threw herself into her daily tasks with extra vigor. The next few days fell into a routine. Dylan would leave early for the Maxwell Ranch and return in the evening, usually dusty and tired but always polite and respectful. He never again offered to help with chores or tried to engage Deanna in personal conversation, which should have been exactly what she wanted. Instead, she found herself increasingly aware of his presence, noticing details she had no business noticing. The way he always held doors for Mrs. Cooper, how he spoke respectfully to Samuel Chen despite the prejudice many whites showed toward the Chinese workers, the gentle way he handled his horse, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he approached life with humor rather than bitterness. It was infuriating. 2 weeks after Dylan's arrival, Diana was at the general store purchasing supplies when she overheard 2 women gossiping near the fabric section. "That new cowboy at the Maxwell place is quite handsome," one woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the store. "I hear he is staying at Deanna Jensen's boarding house." "Poor man," the other woman replied with false sympathy. "She is such an ice queen, I doubt she has said 2 civil words to him. Can you imagine being stuck in a house with that cold woman?" Deanna felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she kept her expression neutral as she completed her purchases and left the store with her head high. She had endured worse gossip back in St. Louis, and she had learned to let such comments roll off her back. But somehow, hearing herself described as cold and unwelcoming stung more than she wanted to admit. That evening, she made a special effort with supper, preparing roasted chicken with vegetables and fresh bread. It was not because of what she had overheard, she told herself firmly. She simply had the time and ingredients to make something nicer than usual. The boarders responded enthusiastically to the improved meal, and even Mrs. Cooper had seconds. Dylan complimented the food sincerely, and Deanna found herself almost smiling before she caught herself and retreated to the kitchen with the dirty dishes. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when Dylan appeared again in the doorway. She braced herself for another unwanted conversation, but he simply picked up a dish towel and began drying the clean plates she had stacked beside the basin. "Mr. Armstrong, I told you that I do not need help," Deanna said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I know what you told me," Dylan replied, continuing to dry dishes. "But I was raised to help out where I can, and it seems wrong to sit idle while someone else does all the work. You can tell me to leave if you really want to, but I would appreciate it if you would just let me help." Deanna wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the distance she had carefully cultivated, but something in his straightforward manner disarmed her usual defenses. She sighed and returned her attention to washing. "Fine. Do as you please." They worked in silence for several minutes, and Diana found the quiet companionship unexpectedly comfortable. It reminded her of helping her mother in the kitchen years ago, before everything had become complicated and painful. The meal tonight was exceptional, Dylan said eventually. "You are a fine cook, Miss Jensen." "Thank you," Deanna replied stiffly, unused to accepting compliments. "How long have you been running this boarding house?" 3 months. I inherited it from my aunt." "Did you come here from back east?" Diana's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Mr. Armstrong, I appreciate your help with the dishes, but I do not wish to discuss my personal history." "Fair enough," Dylan said easily, without apparent offense. "How about we talk about something else then? Did you hear about the territorial fair coming to town next month? Supposed to be quite an event." Despite herself, Deanna felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Discussing neutral topics felt safer than the personal questions that made her want to retreat. "I heard something about it. Apparently, they are bringing in horse races and competitions." "I am thinking about entering the bronc riding competition," Dylan said, a note of excitement entering his voice. "I used to compete some back in Texas. It has been a while, but I reckon I still remember how it is done." "Is bronc riding not dangerous?" Deanna asked before she could stop herself. Dylan grinned at her, and she noticed for the first time that he had a small scar above his left eyebrow. "It can be, but what worth doing is not a little dangerous. Besides, I am pretty good at staying on angry horses. It is stubborn women who throw me off balance." Deanna felt heat rise in her cheeks at the teasing tone in his voice, and she quickly focused on the pot she was scrubbing. "I am sure I do not know what you mean." "I am sure you do," Dylan replied, but his tone remained light rather than pressing. "You are about the most guarded person I have ever met, Miss Jensen, and that is saying something considering I have met some mighty closed-off folks in my travels." "Perhaps I have good reason to be guarded," Deanna shot back, irritation flaring. "Perhaps you do," Dylan agreed, surprising her. "But that is a lonely way to live." His words hit too close to the truth. Deanna tried not to acknowledge. She yanked her hands from the dishwater and dried them roughly on her apron. "I think that is quite enough help for tonight, Mr. Armstrong. Thank you for your assistance." She did not wait for his response before fleeing to her room, her heart pounding with an emotion she could not name. She pressed her hands against her burning cheeks and tried to regain her composure. Why did Dylan Armstrong affect her so strongly? She had successfully kept every other person in Canon City at arm's length, maintaining polite but distant relationships that required nothing of her emotionally. But something about the way Dylan looked at her, spoke to her, existed in her space, made all her careful walls feel flimsy and inadequate. The next morning, Deanna woke with a headache and a sense of dread about facing Dylan at breakfast. But when she descended to the kitchen, she found a note on the table written in surprisingly neat handwriting. "Miss Jensen had to leave extra early to help with a cattle drive to the north pasture. Will miss breakfast but looking forward to supper. Thank you for your hospitality. Dylan Armstrong." Deanna told herself the feeling in her chest was relief and nothing else. The following week passed with Dylan's schedule remaining irregular due to ranch demands. Sometimes he made it back for supper, sometimes not until late evening when Deanna had already retired to her room. Their interactions remained brief and polite, and Deanna convinced herself that things had returned to a comfortable, manageable distance. Then came the afternoon when Sheriff Paulson knocked on her door with news that would change everything. "Miss Jensen, I am sorry to bother you, but there has been an incident at the Maxwell Ranch. Dylan Armstrong was thrown from a horse and injured. Doc Harrison is with him now, but Mr. Maxwell thought you should know since he boards with you." Deanna felt her stomach drop in a way that terrified her with its intensity. "How badly is he hurt?" "Concussion and some cracked ribs, from what I understand. He will recover, but the doc wants him on bed rest for at least a week, maybe 2." Mr. Maxwell was hoping you might be able to look after him here, since the ranch bunkhouse is not really set up for someone who needs careful monitoring. Every instinct Diana possessed screamed at her to refuse, to maintain her distance, to protect herself from the vulnerability of caring about another person's well-being. But the image of Dylan lying injured somewhere pushed past all her defenses, and she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. Of course. Bring him here as soon as the doctor says it is safe to move him. They brought Dylan to the boarding house 2 hours later, carrying him carefully up the stairs to his room. He was conscious but clearly in pain, his face pale and tight around the eyes. Doc Harrison gave Diana detailed instructions about monitoring him for signs of worsening head injury and keeping him still so his ribs could heal. "I will check on him daily," the doctor said, "but he will need someone watching him closely, especially the first few days." "Can you manage that, Miss Jensen?" "Yes," Diana heard herself say, though the commitment terrified her. After everyone left, Diana sat in the chair beside Dylan's bed, studying his bruised and battered face. His eyes were closed and his breathing was shallow but steady. She had no idea how she was supposed to guard her heart while nursing this man back to health, but she also knew she could not have made any other choice. Dylan's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at her with unfocused confusion before recognition set in. "Miss Jensen." "You need to rest, Mr. Armstrong. Doctor's orders." "Always so formal," Dylan murmured, his words slightly slurred from pain and the laudanum Doc Harrison had administered. "Even when I am half dead, you cannot bring yourself to use my first name." "You are not half dead," Diana said firmly, though fear clutched at her chest. "You are going to be fine, you just need to rest and heal. Will you take care of me?" The question was vulnerable in a way she had never heard from him before. "Yes," Diana whispered, "I will take care of you." Dylan's eyes drifted closed again, and within moments, his breathing deepened into sleep. Diana sat watching him for a long time, her hands clenched in her lap, trying to understand how this had happened. She had come to Canon City to escape from feelings, to build a life that required nothing of her heart, and somehow this cowboy had slipped past every defense she had constructed. The next 3 days were exhausting. Dylan drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and sometimes confused. Diana barely left his side except to prepare meals for the other boarders and attend to the most essential household tasks. Mrs. Cooper kindly offered to help with some of the cooking, and Diana accepted gratefully, too worried about Dylan to maintain her usual self-sufficient stance. On the 3rd night, Dylan's fever spiked dangerously high. Diana spent hours sponging him with cool water, changing his sweat-soaked sheets, and fighting her own rising panic. Doc Harrison had warned her this might happen, that head injuries could sometimes lead to fever and infection, but knowing it intellectually did nothing to calm the fear that gripped her as she watched Dylan thrash and mumble incoherently. "Please," she whispered, not sure if she was praying or simply pleading with fate. "Please do not take him. Please let him be all right." Somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, the fever broke. Dylan's thrashing stilled, his breathing evened out, and when Diana pressed her hand to his forehead, his skin felt cooler. She slumped in her chair, exhausted and emotionally wrung out, and before she knew it, she had fallen asleep with her head resting on the edge of Dylan's bed. She woke to find his hand resting gently on her hair. Diana jerked upright, disoriented and embarrassed, pushing the loosened strands of hair back from her face. Dylan was watching her with clear, alert eyes, and there was such tenderness in his expression that Diana felt something crack inside her chest. "You stayed with me," Dylan said, his voice rough from disuse. "Of course I stayed with you," Diana replied, trying to sound brisk and practical. "Dr. Harrison said you needed monitoring. And you were so worried that you fell asleep at my bedside," Dylan observed, a slight smile tugging at his lips despite the obvious pain the movement caused. Diana stood abruptly, smoothing her wrinkled dress. "You had a high fever." "I was concerned about infection. It was nothing more than basic medical care." "Diana," Dylan said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips stopped her retreat. She turned back to find him struggling to sit up slightly, wincing with the effort. "Stop that," Diana said sharply, moving to help him adjust his pillows. "You are going to hurt yourself worse." "Then stay and talk to me," Dylan replied. "If I promise to lie still, will you stay?" Diana wanted to refuse, wanted to retreat to the safety of the kitchen where she could pretend her heart was not doing frightening things in her chest. But she had run from enough things in her life, and suddenly, she found she did not have the energy to keep running. She sat back down in the chair, folding her hands in her lap. "What do you want to talk about?" "You," Dylan said simply. "I want to know who hurt you so badly that you built walls strong enough to keep the whole world out." Diana flinched as if he had struck her. "That is none of your business." "Maybe not," Dylan agreed. "But I am going to tell you something anyway. These past few days, floating in and out of consciousness, do you know what I remember most clearly? Your voice. You talking to me, telling me I was going to be all right, asking me to keep fighting. And once, when I was burning up with fever, I could have sworn I heard you say, 'Please do not leave me.' Did I imagine that?" Diana looked away, feeling tears prick her eyes for the first time since coming to Canon City. "You were delirious. You probably imagined all sorts of things." "Maybe," Dylan said softly. "But I do not think so. I think somewhere beneath all that ice you have frozen yourself in, there is a warm heart that is scared to death of being broken again. And I think you might care about me a little bit, even though you are fighting it with everything you have." "You do not know what you are talking about," Diana said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then tell me I am wrong," Dylan challenged gently. "Tell me you feel nothing when you look at me, and I will never mention it again. I will be the perfect, respectful boarder, and we can go back to pretending we are just landlady and tenant." Diana opened her mouth to do exactly that, to deny everything and retreat back into her comfortable numbness. But the words would not come. Instead, what emerged was something far more honest and terrifying. "I cannot," she whispered. "Cannot what?" "I cannot tell you I feel nothing." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. "But that does not mean anything, Dylan. Feelings are dangerous. Feelings make you vulnerable. Feelings destroy you when the person you care about betrays you or leaves you or turns out to be something completely different than what you believed." "Who was he?" Dylan asked. "The man who hurt you." And suddenly, after months of keeping it locked inside, Diana found herself telling him everything. She told him about Thomas Whitmore and the wedding that never happened, about discovering his betrayal and the humiliation that followed, about the way it had shattered her faith not just in Thomas, but in love itself. She told him about fleeing to Canon City and building a life that required nothing of her heart because she had decided her heart was not to be trusted. Dylan listened without interrupting, and when she finally fell silent, he reached out and took her hand. Diana let him, too tired to pull away. "I understand now," Dylan said quietly. "And I am sorry that happened to you. That man was a fool and a coward, and he did not deserve you. But Diana, you have been punishing yourself for his failures. You have locked yourself away from everything good and beautiful in life because you are afraid of being hurt again. That is not living. That is just existing." "Existing is safer," Diana said, but even she could hear the doubt in her voice. "Safer, maybe, but lonelier too. And I think you are tired of being lonely." Dylan squeezed her hand gently. I know I am. Deanna looked at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. What are you asking from me, Dylan? I am asking you to give me a chance. Give us a chance. I am not Thomas Whitmore. I am not going to lie to you or betray you or pretend to be something I am not. I am just a cowboy who works hard, tries to treat people right, and who has found himself falling for a strong, complicated, beautiful woman who is scared to death of feeling anything. Let me show you that not all men are liars. Let me restore your faith. The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and danger in equal measure. Deanna felt tears spill down her cheeks, the first tears she had allowed herself since leaving St. Louis. I do not know if I can, she admitted. I do not know if I remember how to trust someone. Then we will take it slow, Dylan said. One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads. Can you try that much? Deanna thought about the alternative. Returning to her cold, lonely existence, keeping everyone at arm's length, living half a life because she was too afraid to risk her heart again. She thought about how she had felt during Dylan's fever, the terror that had gripped her at the thought of losing him, and she realized that it was already too late to protect herself completely. He had already gotten past her defenses, and the choice now was whether to acknowledge it or keep fighting a battle she had already lost. I can try, she whispered. Dylan smiled, and despite the bruises and exhaustion on his face, it was the most beautiful thing Deanna had seen in a long time. That is all I am asking. He fell asleep still holding her hand, and Deanna sat there in the morning light streaming through the window, feeling something she had not experienced in over a year. Hope. Dylan's recovery was slow but steady. Over the following 2 weeks, Deanna found herself spending more and more time in his room, at first under the guise of medical necessity, but gradually because she simply wanted to be near him. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, his childhood in Kansas and Texas, her life before St. Louis, books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had given up and dreams they still held secretly in their hearts. Dylan told her about losing his parents and learning to survive on his own, about the hard years working cattle drives and sleeping under the stars, about the loneliness of drifting from place to place with no real home. Deanna shared more about her time in St. Louis society, the suffocating expectations and shallow relationships, and how the betrayal with Thomas had been almost a relief in some ways, because it gave her permission to stop pretending she fit in that world. I think I was looking for an escape even before Thomas showed his true colors, Deanna admitted one afternoon while helping Dylan walk slowly around his room to rebuild his strength. I just did not realize it at the time. And now you have found your escape in Canon City, Dylan said. Do you like it here, or are you still running? The question made Deanna pause. I do not know, she said honestly. I thought I liked the isolation, the simplicity, but lately I have been wondering if I was confusing safety with happiness. And what do you think now? Deanna looked at him, at this man who had somehow become impossibly important to her in just a few short weeks. I think maybe safety is overrated. Dylan grinned despite the wince of pain from his still healing ribs. That is the Diana I was hoping to meet, the one willing to take a risk or two. As Dylan grew stronger, their relationship deepened in ways that both thrilled and terrified Deanna. He never pushed her beyond what she was ready for, content to hold her hand while they sat on the porch in the evenings, or to brush a strand of hair from her face with infinite gentleness. The other boarders had noticed the shift between them, and Deanna waited for judgment or gossip, but instead found only quiet approval. About time someone put a smile on your face, Frank Morrison said gruffly one morning at breakfast. "That cowboy is good people, Miss Jensen. You could do worse." Even Mrs. Cooper weighed in, patting Deanna's hand one evening and saying softly, "Love is worth the risk, dear. Always worth the risk." But Deanna was not ready to call it love, not yet. That word carried too much weight, too much history, too much potential for pain. She told herself they were just getting to know each other, exploring possibilities, taking things one day at a time just as Dylan had promised. 3 weeks after his accident, Dylan was cleared by Doc Harrison to return to light work at the Maxwell Ranch. Deanna felt an unexpected pang of loss at the thought of him spending long days away again, and she realized with some surprise that she had grown accustomed to his constant presence in the boarding house. The night before he returned to work, Dylan asked if she would take a walk with him. Canon City was quiet under the August stars, and they strolled slowly through the mostly empty streets, Dylan's hand warm and solid around hers. "I want to thank you," Dylan said as they paused near the edge of town, looking out at the dark shapes of mountains against the starlit sky. "Not just for taking care of me when I was injured, but for giving me a chance. For trying, even though I know how hard it is for you. You make it easier than I expected," Deanna admitted. "I thought letting someone in would feel like weakness, but with you it feels more like strength." "That is because it is strength," Dylan replied, turning to face her. "It takes real courage to be vulnerable, to open yourself up to caring about someone. You are one of the bravest people I have ever met, Deanna Jensen, even if you do not see it yourself." Deanna felt her eyes burn with emotion. "I do not feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. Being brave does not mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the thing anyway." Dylan lifted his hand to cup her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing gently across her skin. "Can I kiss you?" Diana's breath caught. They had shared many moments of closeness over the past weeks, but Dylan had never tried to kiss her, waiting for a signal that she was ready. The fact that he asked permission, that he gave her the choice, made her want it all the more. "Yes," she whispered. Dylan leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet, full of patience and promise, and Deanna felt something inside her chest expand and warm like spring sun melting winter ice. She leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, and let herself feel everything she had been fighting for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Dylan rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Deanna. I know it is too soon to say it, and I am not asking you to say it back. I just wanted you to know." Diana's first instinct was to panic, to pull away, to retreat behind her walls, but she forced herself to stay present, to feel the fear without letting it control her. "I do not know if I am ready to say those words yet," she said honestly. "But I am feeling things I never thought I would feel again. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Dylan assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and that night Deanna lay in her bed feeling more alive and terrified than she had in years. The thought of loving Dylan and potentially losing him still scared her, but the thought of missing out on what they could have together scared her more. The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. Dylan returned to full duties at the Maxwell Ranch, working long days with the cattle but always making it back for supper. Afterward, he and Deanna would sit on the porch or take walks through town, talking and laughing and slowly building something that felt real and solid. Dylan never pressed her for more declarations of feeling, content to show his love through actions rather than demanding words. He fixed a loose step on the porch without being asked, helped Mrs. Cooper carry her laundry upstairs when her arthritis was acting up, and always took time to listen when Samuel Chen shared stories about his family back in China, despite the language barriers that sometimes made communication difficult. Watching Dylan interact with the world around him taught Deanna something important. Love was not just about romance and grand gestures. It was about showing up consistently, treating people with kindness and respect, and choosing to be present even when it would be easier to turn away. Dylan lived these principles naturally, and it made Deanna want to be better, to let down her defenses and engage with the world more fully. The territorial fair arrived in early September as promised, bringing with it excitement and crowds from surrounding towns. Deanna found herself caught up in the festive atmosphere, despite her usual preference for staying in the background. Dylan had indeed entered the bronc riding competition, and Deanna discovered she could not bear the thought of missing it. She stood at the fence surrounding the competition arena, her hands gripping the rough wood as Dylan prepared for his ride. He caught her eye and winked, and Deanna felt her heart do a ridiculous flip in her chest. When had she become this person, anxiously watching a cowboy risk injury for sport? But she knew the answer. She had become this person the moment she admitted to caring about Dylan Armstrong, and there was no going back now. The bronc was a mean-looking paint horse with a reputation for throwing riders quickly and violently. Deanna watched with her heart in her throat as Dylan settled into the saddle, one hand gripping the rigging, the other raised high. The gate opened, and the horse exploded out of the chute in a fury of bucking and spinning. Deanna forgot to breathe as she watched Dylan move with the horse, his body absorbing the violent movements with the kind of skill that came from years of practice and natural talent. The seconds stretched into eternity, and when the whistle finally blew signaling a successful 8-second ride, Deanna released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Dylan dismounted as the pickup riders moved in to control the bronc, landing on his feet with a grace that made it look easy despite the difficulty. His score was announced, and the crowd erupted in cheers. He had won the competition. Deanna found herself pushing through the crowd without conscious thought, needing to reach him, needing to touch him and confirm he was all right. When she finally broke through to where he stood accepting congratulations from other cowboys, Dylan's face lit up at the sight of her. "Did you see that?" he asked, grinning like a boy. "I saw it," Deanna said, punching him lightly in the shoulder. "You scared me half to death. But I stayed on," Dylan pointed out, catching her hand before she could pull it away. "And I won $50, which I am planning to spend on taking a beautiful woman to dinner if she will agree to it." "Dylan Armstrong, are you asking me on a proper date?" Deanna asked, feeling a smile tug at her lips. "I am indeed. What do you say, Deanna Jensen? Will you have dinner with me tomorrow evening? We could go to that fancy hotel restaurant you mentioned once. I promise to wear my cleanest shirt." Deanna looked at him, dusty and happy and so full of life it made her chest ache. This man who had somehow slipped past all her defenses and made her want things she had sworn she would never want again. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." Dylan's answering smile was worth every risk, every moment of fear, every crack in the walls she had built so carefully around her heart. Their dinner the following evening was everything Deanna had not known she wanted. Dylan arrived at the boarding house dressed in clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable with the formality. Deanna had chosen her best dress, a deep blue silk that had survived the journey from St. Louis, and still made her feel pretty when she wore it. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Canon City, which admittedly was not saying much compared to the restaurants Deanna had frequented in St. Louis. But there were white tablecloths and candles and a piano player in the corner, and Diana found she enjoyed it more than any of the fancy dinners she had attended back east. "You look beautiful," Dylan said once they were seated, and the sincerity in his voice made Diana blush. "You clean up rather nicely yourself," she replied, then immediately felt foolish for the awkward phrasing. But Dylan just laughed, easy and genuine. "I do try. Though I have to admit I am more comfortable in dusty work clothes. This vest is trying to strangle me." They ordered steaks and vegetables, and conversation flowed easily as it always did between them. Dylan told her about his early days working ranches, the characters he had met, and the vast, empty beauty of the Texas plains. Diana shared more about her childhood, the mother she had lost to influenza when she was 17, and the complicated relationship she had with her father who had remarried quickly and started a new family. "I think that was part of why I was so eager to believe in Thomas and his promises," Diana admitted over dessert. "I wanted to build my own family, to have something that belonged to me. When it all fell apart, it felt like confirmation that I was not meant to have that kind of happiness." "You know that is not true, right?" Dylan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "What happened with Thomas was about his failures, not yours. You deserve every happiness, Diana. You just have to be willing to believe that yourself." Diana turned her hand over so their palms pressed together. "I am starting to believe it," she said softly, "because of you." After dinner, they walked slowly back toward the boarding house, taking the long route that led past the church and the small park where a few late blooming flowers still brightened the twilight. Dylan kept her hand tucked securely in his, and Diana felt a peace settle over her that she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. "Dylan," she said as they paused under a large cottonwood tree, "I need to tell you something." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "All right." Diana took a breath, gathering her courage. "You told me weeks ago that you were falling in love with me, and I said I was not ready to say those words back. But I have been thinking about it, and I realize I have been holding back not because I do not feel it, but because I am scared of what it means." "And now?" Dylan asked gently. "Now I am still scared," Diana admitted. "But I am more scared of losing this, of losing you, because I was too much of a coward to admit what I feel." She looked up at him, meeting his eyes directly. "I love you, Dylan Armstrong. I do not know when it happened or how you managed to get past all my defenses, but you did, and I love you." Dylan's face transformed with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. "Say it again," he murmured against her hair. "I love you," Diana repeated, and this time the words came easier. "I love you." Dylan pulled back just enough to kiss her, and this kiss was different from their first. It was deeper, more urgent, full of all the emotion they had been building toward for months. Diana kissed him back with everything she had, finally allowing herself to feel fully and freely without fear holding her back. When they finally made it back to the boarding house, both slightly breathless and grinning at each other like fools, they found Mrs. Cooper sitting on the porch. "You young people look happy," she observed with a knowing smile. "We are," Dylan confirmed, not letting go of Diana's hand. "Good," Mrs. Cooper said, standing carefully. "It is about time. Now I am going to bed and leave you two to your courting. Just remember that these old walls are not that thick, so keep things respectable." She shuffled inside, leaving Dylan and Diana laughing on the porch. They sat on the steps together, Diana leaning against Dylan's shoulder, and watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "So what happens now?" Diana asked. "Now we keep doing what we have been doing," Dylan said. "We spend time together, we learn more about each other, and we see where this leads. Though I should tell you, I already know where I hope it leads." "Oh, and where is that?" Dylan turned to look at her, his expression serious despite the smile in his eyes. "I hope it leads to you agreeing to be my wife someday. Not today or tomorrow, but when you are ready. I want to build a life with you, Deanna. A real life full of love and partnership and everything that fool back in St. Louis was too blind to appreciate." Deanna felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I think I would like that too," she whispered. "When I am ready." "When you are ready," Dylan agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I can wait." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Deanna could remember. She and Dylan became an acknowledged couple in Canon City, and Diana found that the gossip she had feared never materialized. Instead, people seemed genuinely pleased to see her happy, and several townspeople went out of their way to express their approval. Work at the Maxwell Ranch kept Dylan busy as autumn settled over Colorado and the cattle needed to be moved to different pastures. But he always made time for Deanna, showing up for meals and spending evenings with her whenever possible. They fell into an easy domesticity that felt both comfortable and exciting. Diana also found herself opening up to the world in other ways. She started attending church services occasionally, something she had avoided since arriving in Canon City. She helped organize a fundraiser for the new schoolhouse. She even joined a small sewing circle that met weekly at the general store, though she had always considered herself terrible at needlework. "You are different than you were when I first arrived," Dylan observed one evening in late October as they sat by the fireplace in the boarding house common room. The other boarders had retired for the night, leaving them alone. "Different how?" Deanna asked, looking up from the book she was reading. "Softer," Dylan said, then quickly amended, "No, that is not quite right, not softer. More open, maybe, like you have stopped trying so hard to keep the world at bay." Diana considered this. "I think you are right. I spent so long protecting myself that I forgot what it felt like to actually live. You reminded me. You showed me that being vulnerable is not the same as being weak." "You did that yourself," Dylan corrected gently. "I just gave you a reason to want to try." As November approached and the weather turned colder, Diana began to think seriously about the future. She loved running the boarding house, but she also loved the idea of building a life with Dylan. She had no idea how to reconcile those two things, especially since Dylan worked at the Maxwell Ranch and showed no signs of leaving. The solution came from an unexpected source. Richard Maxwell himself stopped by the boarding house one afternoon, asking to speak with Deanna privately. "Miss Jensen, I wanted to discuss something with you," he said once they were seated in her small private parlor. "Dylan Armstrong is one of the best hands I have ever employed. He is skilled, reliable, and the other men respect him. I am planning to promote him to foreman when my current foreman retires next spring." "That is wonderful," Deanna said, wondering why Mr. Maxwell was telling her this. "It is, but there is a complication. The foreman position comes with a small house on the ranch property. It is meant for a family man, someone who will stay long-term and help me build something lasting. Dylan has mentioned that you two are courting, and I wanted to know if that courtship might be heading towards something more permanent." Diana felt her cheeks heat. "That is rather personal, Mr. Maxwell. I know, and I apologize for being blunt, but I need to know whether to offer Dylan the position or look elsewhere. If you two are planning a future together, the timing could work well. If not, I need to make other arrangements." Deanna took a breath. "Mr. Maxwell, I appreciate your consideration. The truth is, Dylan and I have discussed a future together, but we have not made any definite plans. I need to speak with him before I can give you any kind of answer." "Fair enough," Mr. Maxwell said, standing. "Take your time, but let me know by Christmas if possible. That gives me time to make other arrangements if needed." After he left, Deanna sat in the quiet parlor feeling both excited and overwhelmed. Everything was moving quickly, faster than she had expected, and she needed to talk to Dylan before her thoughts spun completely out of control. That evening, after supper, Diana asked Dylan to take a walk with her despite the cold November air. They bundled into coats and headed out into the crisp night, their breath forming clouds in the lamplight. "Mr. Maxwell came to see me today," Deanna said once they were away from the boarding house. "Oh, what did he want?" Deanna explained about the foreman position and the house that came with it, and the questions Mr. Maxwell had asked about their future. Dylan listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. "I did not know he was considering me for foreman," Dylan said finally. "That is quite an honor." "It is," Deanna agreed. "But Dylan, I do not want you to feel pressured about anything. About us, I mean. We have only been courting for a few months, and I do not want job opportunities or houses or anything else to push us into decisions we are not ready for." Dylan stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Deanna, I love you. I have known I wanted to marry you since that night in September when you told me you loved me. The only reason I have not asked you officially is because I wanted to wait until I could offer you something more than a cowboy's wages and a room in a boarding house." "I do not need more than that," Deanna protested. "Maybe not, but I want to give you more. I want to give you a real home, Deanna. A place where we can build a life together, maybe raise children if you want them. This foreman position, it could be the opportunity we need. But only if you are ready. Only if this is what you want too." Deanna looked at him, this good man who had restored her faith in love when she had thought it impossible. She thought about the life they could build together, about waking up beside him every morning and falling asleep in his arms every night. She thought about the possibility of children, of a family built on honesty and partnership rather than lies and social expectations. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes," Dylan repeated, his eyes widening. "Yes to what exactly?" Deanna laughed, feeling lighter than air despite the cold night. "Yes to all of it. Yes, I am ready. Yes, I want to marry you. Yes, I want to build a life with you. Yes to whatever comes next as long as we face it together." Dylan let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he immediately dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the street. "I do not have a ring yet," he said, "but I cannot wait another moment. Deanna Jensen, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a drifting cowboy who promises to love you faithfully for the rest of his days?" "Yes," Deanna said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you, Dylan Armstrong." Dylan stood and kissed her deeply, and Deanna felt the last pieces of her broken heart finally heal completely. She had thought she would never believe in love again, but Dylan had proven her wrong. He had shown her that love was not about grand gestures or perfect people. It was about choosing someone every day, about showing up and being present, about building something real together. They went back to the boarding house and shared their news with the other boarders, who responded with genuine happiness and congratulations. "Mrs. Cooper hugged Deanna tightly and whispered, "I knew it from the start. You two were meant for each other." Even gruff Frank Morrison clapped Dylan on the back and said, "You are getting a fine woman there, Armstrong. You treat her right, you hear?" "I plan to," Dylan assured him. The next day, Diana went with Dylan to give Mr. Maxwell their answer. The rancher was delighted and immediately began making plans for Dylan to transition into the foreman role. He also arranged for them to visit the foreman's house, which turned out to be a cozy 2-bedroom structure with a fireplace, a decent kitchen, and a porch that overlooked a pretty valley. "It needs some work," Mr. Maxwell admitted. The previous foreman was a bachelor and did not keep it up well. "But it has good bones, and I imagine a woman with your skills could make it quite comfortable, Miss Jensen." "I think it is perfect," Deanna said honestly, already imagining how she would arrange furniture and plant flowers in the spring. They set the wedding date for late December, giving them time to make basic preparations, but not so long that they had to wait through the winter months. Deanna would continue running the boarding house until then, at which point she would sell it to a young couple who had expressed interest in taking it over. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Deanna sewed her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk. Mrs. Cooper helped with the embroidery work, creating delicate patterns along the collar and cuffs. Dylan spent his spare time fixing up the foreman's house, repairing the roof, replacing broken windows, and building new furniture. On December 20, 1878, Deanna Jensen and Dylan Armstrong were married in the small Canon City church. The whole town seemed to turn out for the ceremony, and Deanna found herself deeply moved by how many people had come to celebrate with them. She walked down the aisle on Sheriff Paulson's arm, having no family present, but feeling surrounded by community nonetheless. Dylan waited for her at the altar, dressed in a new suit and looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. When their eyes met, Deanna felt a surge of absolute certainty that this was right, that everything she had endured had led her to this moment. They spoke their vows clearly and firmly, promising to love and honor each other through all the challenges and joys ahead. When Dylan kissed her as his wife, Deanna felt completely and perfectly happy. The reception was held at the hotel, and Deanna danced with Dylan until her feet hurt and her face ached from smiling. They spent their wedding night in a room at the hotel, and Deanna discovered that physical intimacy with someone you truly loved was nothing like she had imagined. It was tender and awkward and wonderful all at once, and she fell asleep in Dylan's arms feeling cherished and complete. They moved into the foreman's house after Christmas, and Deanna threw herself into making it a real home. She hung curtains, arranged furniture, and began planning a garden for spring. Dylan officially took over as foreman in January, and Deanna watched with pride as he stepped into the leadership role with natural confidence and fairness. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. There were disagreements about money and household responsibilities, difficult days when the ranch work was exhausting, and Deanna missed having her own business to run. But they worked through each issue together, learning to communicate and compromise, building the foundation of a strong partnership. In the spring of 1879, Deanna discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror, memories of her mother's difficult pregnancies surfacing alongside excitement about starting their family. Dylan was over the moon with happiness, immediately becoming protective and attentive in ways that made Deanna laugh even as she appreciated his care. Their son was born in November of 1879, a healthy baby boy with Dylan's dark hair and Deanna's gray eyes. They named him Daniel Thomas Armstrong, and Deanna felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Watching Dylan hold their son with such tenderness and awe, she knew without doubt that she had made the right choice in trusting him with her heart. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Emma Grace, who had her father's creek water eyes and her mother's determination. Deanna discovered that she loved being a mother, though it was far more exhausting than she had anticipated. Dylan was a devoted father, always making time for the children no matter how busy the ranch kept him. As the years passed, Deanna and Dylan built a life that was simple but deeply fulfilling. They added 2 more children to their family, another son named Samuel in 1884 and a surprise late arrival, daughter Caroline, in 1888. The foreman's house expanded with additions Dylan built himself, and the garden Diana had dreamed of became a reality, producing vegetables that fed not just their family but several others in the community. Diana never forgot the darkness that had brought her to Canon City, but it no longer defined her. She had learned that hearts could heal, that trust could be rebuilt, and that love was not a fairy tale but a choice made daily through actions large and small. Dylan had restored her faith not through grand romantic gestures but through consistency, honesty, and unwavering support. They grew old together in Canon City, watching their children grow up and have families of their own. Dylan eventually retired from ranch work, and they spent their later years sitting on the porch together, holding hands and watching sunsets paint the Colorado sky in brilliant colors. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Diana looked at Dylan, his hair now gray and his face lined with age, and felt the same flutter of love she had experienced the first time he truly looked at her. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Dylan replied, squeezing her hand. "Best decision I ever made was convincing you to give me a chance." "Best decision I ever made was letting you," Diana countered, smiling. They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. Diana thought about the young woman she had been, bitter and closed off, convinced that love was nothing but lies and disappointment. She wished she could go back and tell that woman not to give up, that real love did exist, that it was worth every risk and every moment of fear. But she could not go back, and she did not need to. She had found her way forward, guided by a cowboy who refused to accept her walls and who loved her patient enough to wait for her to tear them down. Together, they had created a life filled with love, laughter, children, and the kind of partnership Diana had once thought existed only in stories. Their 4 children all settled near Canon City, giving Diana and Dylan 15 grandchildren, who filled the old foreman's house with noise and chaos during family gatherings. Diana loved watching Dylan with the grandchildren, seeing how gentle he remained even in old age, how he listened to their stories and dreams with the same attention he had always given her. In the spring of 1910, Dylan became ill with pneumonia. Diana nursed him as she had 32 years earlier when he had been thrown from a horse, but this time his body was too worn to fight. He died peacefully in their bed, holding Diana's hand, his last words a whispered "I love you." Diana grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had been blessed with 3 decades of love and partnership, had raised 4 children with a man who adored her, and had built a life that was rich with meaning and connection. The pain of losing Dylan was immense, but it was the price of having loved so deeply, and Diana would not have traded a single moment of that love to avoid the grief. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and on a sunny afternoon in August of 1915, Diana passed away quietly in her sleep. Her family buried her beside Dylan on a hillside overlooking the valley they had both loved, and her gravestone bore a simple inscription: Dylan Armstrong, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She learned to believe in love again, and it was true. Diana had come to Canon City, Colorado in 1878 as a broken woman who had sworn off love forever. She had met a cowboy who saw past her walls and loved her patient enough to help her heal. Together, they had created a legacy of love that lasted long after they were gone, proof that hearts could mend, and that sometimes the greatest love stories began with the words, "I do not believe in love anymore," and ended with a lifetime of proving that belief wrong. Their children told their children about Diana and Dylan, about how they had met and fallen in love in the Wild West days of Canon City, and those stories became family legend. The old foreman's house stood for many years, eventually becoming a historical landmark, and people would visit and imagine the young couple who had started their life together within those walls. But the true legacy was not in buildings or stories. It was in the generations of Armstrong children who grew up believing in the power of love, in the importance of choosing your partner every single day, in the courage it took to be vulnerable, and the strength it took to trust. Deanna and Dylan's great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren carried forward the lessons learned from two people who had found each other when both needed it most. And on summer evenings, when the Colorado sun painted the sky in brilliant colors over Canon City, some people swore they could see two figures sitting on that old porch, holding hands and watching the sunset together, proof that some loves truly do last forever. Deanna had said she did not believe in love anymore, and Dylan had answered, "Let me restore your faith." He had done exactly that, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful that endured long after their earthly lives ended. It was a story of healing, of second chances, of the transformative power of real love, and it remained a testament to the truth that it is never too late to open your heart again.